What I've seen in my research, something very powerful, immigrant entrepreneurs or people who have had challenging past, they reframe that past and use it in the present as a fuel that becomes almost the reason for their business or a part of their business. How do we look at a certain situation makes all the difference.
One of the things I really loved about reading your book, getting ready for this, is you're helping me and anybody that reads your book, Pioneers, think more deeply about how leaders show up differently when they're founding and building a business, the differences between those that make it and those that don't. When I read your book, I got the feeling, because the stat is true, over 90% of businesses fail, most of them in the first, or a lot of them in the first year. But I think 90% of them probably don't have to with the mindset that you're talking about in your book. Now, before we get into that, I'd love to set the stage for our listeners. I'd like to go back to when you were 11 and your family basically escaped Bulgaria. What led up to that, and what was that like for you as you started this immigrant journey yourself?
Sure. I was born in Bulgaria to Turkish ethnic minority, and in the 1980s, the communist government of Bulgaria at the time decided to carry out an ethnic assimilation process against minorities who are Turks. And they said there are no Turks in Bulgaria, therefore we were not allowed to speak our language, we were not allowed to have Turkish names. So that ethnic assimilation process, one part of it was they will come house by house, take you from your home, forcibly change your name from a Turkish name to a Bulgarian name. And this went on for about a year. I remember that vividly because at the time I had just started elementary school. If they didn't have a parent, if you didn't have a parent with you, they weren't going to change your name. So my parents initially would escape. We have Bulgarian neighbors. They will go to our Bulgarian neighbors' home because those homes will not be searched because they are Bulgarian. So, I remember one morning being woken up by two police officers with their dogs. My parents were not at home. They had ran to the neighbor again at night, and they didn't take us to change our names because we don't have a guardian. I remember another time when we ran away with my parents to my uncle's hut in the forest, and we spent several weeks there just so we will not have our names changed. And my father had a lot of pride around that. I remember that very much. He really didn't want his name to be changed. But even the dead were not spared because they came to my late grandparents and tombstones and they carved out their names, or they would destroy. And unfortunately, the difference here, it's not, sometimes when I talk about this, I really want to emphasize this is not about Bulgaria or Bulgarian people, but that's about a communist autocratic government and how one person can do a lot of damage, not just to Turkish ethnic minorities, but even to an entire country. So in June of 1989, Todor Zhivkov, the ruler of Bulgaria at the time, came on TV and said, and by the way, by that time, our names had been changed because this is now about almost a decade later. Our names had been changed and it was, I had a Bulgarian name and so on. But you always had the sense of you don't fit in, you don't belong, because the government tells you that. They tell you your name is somehow wrong. Your religion, the language you speak, your culture is somehow wrong because you don't belong here. And in June of 1989, he came on TV and said, anyone who is of Turkish ethnicity, anyone who feels Turkish, now is your chance. You need to leave the country. And the border will be open for a limited amount of time. You have to leave. But you have to have papers to do that. So you will not everyone will be issued papers. For example, they didn't issue them to my mom. because she was born in Greek. She was born in Thessaloniki. Her family is from Thessaloniki, so she's not considered Turkish, although she is. If you had a son who was of military age, 15 years and older, he will not be given papers. So you and your family can go, but your son has to stay in Bulgaria. So a lot of families started to escape as well, those who didn't have the papers. We were one of them. So that's how our journey started. I got into a lot of details suddenly because this is, of course, a very defining moment in my life, and it defines everything I do today.
Yeah, I think it's really important. So you and your family, but not all of your family, went to Turkey along with 360,000 other refugees at that time.
That's right.
And you didn't have a place to go when you went to Turkey, from what I understand.
Yeah.
What was that like, living in a refugee camp?
Very disorienting, very traumatic. At the same time, I talk about it in my book and I talk about it when I give talks. The second we crossed the border, I remember my father's screams like a wounded animal. He threw the 2 suitcases, that was our only belonging, full of clothes, 2 suitcases. He threw them on the ground, started running. I will never forget that. And he kissed the ground of what he called the motherland soil. And my mom, her eyes were filled with fear. And we didn't know where to go. We didn't have money. We didn't know anyone except that my dad knew an aunt who had immigrated 10 years before us. So we were set up to live in a refugee camp, but it was set up by Red Cross. It was very challenging, of course, but at the same time, I remember even that very moment, we hadn't gotten to the refugee camp yet. Looking around me, looking at all the chaos, all the fear and confusion and anxiety, and I'm 11, standing there with my brother and my parents, I say to myself, the way out of this will be if I get a good education. That's my way out. And it really, truly defined everything I do, because that decision became my North Star. I wanted to get a good education despite the circumstances. When we moved to the refugee camp, you are given lessons. They are called transition to the Turkish language, because we speak a dialect of Turkish. It's a very old Ottoman dialect that people in the Balkans speak, of Turkish origin. And we realized very quickly, even though all of our lives we were told that we are Turks, we have nothing much to do with Turkey. My great-grandparents, I guess at some point, were forcibly removed from Ottoman Empire, moved to Bulgaria at some point. But this must have been centuries ago, obviously. So we didn't have much to do with the culture, with the language. We had to learn all of that. And before I started school, I had to learn the Turkish language because I realized I actually didn't speak it.
And when you came, kind of pursuing the education path, when you came to the United States to attend a university, if I remember right, you were 18. How were you able to do that and make that happen?
So I failed to get into the Turkish university, which was, imagine, my biggest desire in life is to go to university. I would have been the first one in my family to do so. And when the Turkish university results came in, I had failed to get into my dream university. I had written only one choice, so very ambitious, but that's the only university I wanted to go to. It's called Koç University, and I wrote the scholarship for business management department. So after that initial shock of failure, I thought, I don't want to spend one more year in Turkey preparing for yet another year of preparation, because the national university exam takes place only once a year. and everyone is admitted in September. The exam takes place around May, and then you find out late August if you got in or not. So I found a place in Turkey that helps you get into international universities, not only US, but everywhere in the world, Australia, UK. And there was a woman, so she must have really pitied me, or she was just a nice person, because those type of places will not do it for free. I didn't have money. I just told her my story. I told her why I was 18. I didn't tell my parents I was doing that. I basically said, I need to go into university. These are my grades. I had taken the TOEFL exam. I had taken the SAT, and I had very high results. I think in TOEFL, I had a perfect score with no mistake at all. SAT, very high result. And she looked at it and said, of course I can, there is a lot of promise here. She told me where some organizations give financial aid. She helped me with the applications without charging me any money. And I got into university, and I also told her, I don't have a year to waste. I need to go now. And University of Miami basically said they will admit me to the honors program. The organization with the financial aid came through. It's a Turkish organization, but it's a very limited financial aid. And they said I can start immediately in January of 1996. So, yes, and I had University of Manchester. I remember several universities in UK, and it was economics and Russian language, because I speak Russian, having grown up in communism in Bulgaria. So that's the story of how I got to University of Miami. And I took one suitcase, actually the date is January 6th of 1996, and I came to University of Miami.
That's incredible. And I believe you finished the program in 2.5 years, correct?
Yeah, I
Your
did.
bachelor's?
I did.
Yeah. And so when you were about 22, you went back to Turkey to start your family business with your family. And it looks like incredibly high-end products. But I'm curious, what did you have to leverage to start that business, which is doing incredibly well today, from what I can tell?
Basically, initially, I was working already as a translator for my mom and dad. They started selling these import extra t-shirts, jeans, and so on. I go into a lot of detail in the book. It's a long story, but they were selling a Turkish entrepreneurs leather products to Russia, to the former Soviet Republic countries, because, and I talk a lot about this in the book as well, how homophilic ties, how creating a community, how your shared cultural understanding allows you to create a business, and how to leverage those. And I think that's exactly what we did. We focused on our social capital, on our family ties. And when we first opened our tiny little, it's not even a boutique, it was an apartment on the second floor in the luggage trade area, where all these future budding entrepreneurs from the former Soviet countries were coming. And we put up a sign that said, please come in for a homeland cup of coffee. And having this, and the signal was, we know where you come from. We are on the same boat as you. We want to create the same thing as you, because this is not just me saying. Academic articles that analyze the luggage trade economy at the time also pinpoint this fact, because unfortunately, many people saw those who were coming from former Soviet countries as a quick buck to make. That you can sell them any product they will buy it. And it was a very short-term thinking. And yes, they did buy it, but they didn't return again to them. But with us, it was a relationship building. We emphasized that a lot, and it wasn't done with the idea that at some point we are going to get, we will make money out of those entrepreneurs, but it's because we really understood where they are coming from. There was this shared understanding of what they wanted to achieve and what we wanted to achieve. So during that time, I started to take my mom and dad, my parents, and the people who own the Turkish leather products company to Italy, to the trade fairs in Italy, and I will work for them as a translator. This allowed us to understand where the best suppliers of Italian products are, of Italian skin. But again, it's something very interesting. We would go for dinners with these Italian suppliers. And that's why I say in my book as well, you don't have to come from the same culture, but you can use this shared understanding, strategic storytelling in order to build these relationships and focus on that. Because not all the time you are going to have financial capital in order to start a business, but social capital can at times be much more important than the financial capital you put into a business.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. And I've started a number of companies, and I've never had to raise $1 of outside investment for it. And I would say that the communities that I was able to be part of and build and really lean in and help always leaned back and helped me. It was kind of crazy. I remember early, one year starting my first business, I had a supplier say, we believe in you so much. We'll give you whatever equipment, chemistry you need, whatever it is. You don't have to pay us anything for a year, no interest. We just believe in you. And that's because they were part of my community. And in the book, you talk about family. It goes beyond, in a way, of thinking about of just your immediate blood family. It's what you build. And we were doing business. I sold a company 10 years ago that was doing business in 60 different countries. Took 23 years to build it. I went to at least half of them doing that. And I still have today communities all over the world where I can go just about anywhere and stay with this sort of adopted and built community of family.
So it's very interesting. As you are talking, I will jump ahead, but tell you a very similar example that happened with us. We produce for Prada and Miu Miu today. And as I told you, our biggest clients with our own brand, Neri Karra, were Russia and Ukraine based companies. When the war happened in Russia, we stopped doing business there. And with Ukraine, obviously there is war. You sell, but it's not the same amount of volume. And the manager at Prada said, we value our relationship and we want you to continue working. And we know that now your business is challenged. Instead, we are going to increase our orders to you, so you don't go into hardship as a business. So this is built because of the strong relationship. And what you said, I actually have an academic article about this. I wrote it during my PhD. I was going to write another practitioner one. The title was going to be Build Your Own Family, because you can certainly build family-like structure with your suppliers, with your partners, and within your own company. At Thinkers 50, I joked and said, today the word family gets a bad rep. Like, it became like a toxic word almost. Like, at workplaces, you can't say family. You can't say, and I know where that is coming from. But on the positive side, you can build family-like structures, and this can help you tremendously in business.
I think for me, I never knew my natural father, came from a pretty troubled, dangerous, and toxic kind of home environment growing up. So I almost didn't have a choice but to build my family. And I have a number of sets of adopted parents that I love dearly. Informally adopted kids. I've got a number of those that their families come and stay with me that we've had relationships for decades. Uh, and I think of them as family, and this is a really cool thing to build. And we have so many kids really around the world, in the US, but everywhere, that come up in the system, in the foster system. Is there supposed to be a stigma around that, or is that an incredible opportunity for them to leverage that struggle to build a
Absolutely.
really meaningful family?
In the book, I also talk about reframing your past. What I've seen in my research, something very powerful. Immigrant entrepreneurs or people who have had challenging past, they reframe that past and use it in the present as a fuel. But even sometimes as a way to, that becomes almost the reason for their business or a part of their business. They will not see their past as a burden or something to be ashamed of, but they will reframe that. And as a result, they also reframe failure, rejection. But reframing what you just said, how do we look at a certain situation makes all the difference.
Yeah, I think that all the opportunity in the world is in the struggle. And so many people, when it gets hard, they think something is wrong, but that's where we grow, that's where we learn. And I think that's really the essence of your story and so many immigrants' story that do well when they start a business and become successful. And I never realized this, but I think if I had thought about it for a minute, it would have made complete sense. But until I read your book, one of the statistics that you brought up is that immigrants make up 13% of the U.S. population and 28% of its entrepreneurs. That's incredible. 47% of Fortune 500 companies were founded by immigrants. And I think it's that relationship with struggle and always knowing that there's a way and they'll just keep moving until they find it that makes the difference for immigrants. And that doesn't mean that if you're not a first generation immigrant, you can't adopt this mindset, this approach to reframing and struggle. And there's always, even in unhealthy struggles, there's value that can be learned from that to be used in the future to help your family and others. But that's what really struck me with your book, and I recommend that every one of our listeners reads Pioneers, because it's how you are on this journey of building a business that you describe really well, that's so significantly different than how most actually think about that. So if you could talk a little bit more about the struggle, reframing, and the differences between immigrant entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
And we can go through any and all of the 8 principles, but the primary differences over a lot of
Absolutely. I
folks when they
think
run at it, they're not
with
successful.
immigrant entrepreneurs, it's interesting. I studied many of them. Some of them are incredibly well known, from Moderna, founder of Moderna, Nubara Feyan, to founder of Chobani, Hamdi Ulukaya, founder of Duolingo. They come from challenging backgrounds. Some come from war-torn countries, some come from poverty, and they don't necessarily have, the circumstances that, when you look at it, will allow them to create billion-dollar companies or allow them to create these companies that change industries. But in terms of there is failure, of course, but what struck me is they don't see failure the same way that someone else will. They don't register it as failure. I just remember the founder of Calendly. Before he started Calendly, I think he failed several businesses. But during the interview, he says, I didn't fail those other businesses. It was just an information for me that allowed me to build Calendly that is today. Without those so-called failures, Calendly will not happen. So that's another thing. But also there is this tremendous amount of, I need to give the very best product and service. I need to give it my all. This is my one chance. And it doesn't mean they don't face rejection, as I mentioned. In fact, I think it's Haim Saban who says, when I hear it's Isaac Larian, who is the founder of MGA Entertainment, the company that makes Bratz dolls, most famously. He says there is no such thing as failure, because what he says is, it was Haim Saban who said, when I hear the word no, that's the beginning of negotiation. And when I hear no, I know I'm on to something. I know I have a good idea if people are telling me no. So it's very much linked to reframing, because they are not thinking, oh, it means there is no opportunity here, but they will keep again and again. I mentioned Isaac Larian. He actually came to US at the age of 17 with a yellow blanket, couple of $100 in his pocket. He comes to LA. He doesn't know anyone. The money that he comes with finishes very quickly, and he starts to look for a job at a gas station, at a cafe, at a restaurant. There are no jobs. He can't find anything. He's staying at a hostel and he starts walking in the morning, goes from gas station to restaurant and so on. Nothing, day after day after day. And then one day he goes to a restaurant called Spire's Cafe in Los Angeles. And they say to him, we don't have any jobs available. And he goes outside. He's just at the end of his rope, as they say, and he puts his head down, and suddenly there's a tap on his shoulder, and the chef from the restaurant came out and says to him, Iranian, are you Iranian? Come back to the restaurant at 11 o'clock. I may have something for you. When he goes back at 11 o'clock after the restaurant closes, the chef makes him liver with onions and tells him, I will have a job for you. You can wash the dishes for less than, minimum wage, basically, but at least he gets the job. Years later, he puts himself to school. He has an engineering degree, starts an electronics company with his brother in US, goes to Japan, and he sees that everyone is with Nintendo in Japan, all the youth. He says, if I bring Nintendo to US, this is going to fly. But the president of Nintendo doesn't even want to meet him. Every single day he goes to the office of Nintendo, despite hearing no day after day, to ask for a meeting with the Nintendo office. He opens a line of credit. It's a no again, but you get the story. He doesn't give up. Eventually, he does bring Nintendo to US.
Yeah, and it was what's interesting about what you're saying is, in a no, there's so much you learn about the other side saying no if you're open to hearing it and not walking away feeling like, oh, that's a failure, or maybe bad about yourself, or I'm not worthy, whatever that happens to be. Products aren't good enough. But there's something there to be leveraged if we're open to learning from it. And it's a great way to think about that. And in this particular story, it's figuring out what would make Nintendo successful, lower their risk. How could we get started doing something around that, and the resiliency to stay all the way through that? I mean, it's incredible. Yeah. So there's something there. What was it when it came to luck as a combination of resiliency and opportunity? Perseverance, all that. Talk about that. Like, these opportunities that come up. How do you position yourself best to take advantage of them, and what's the work along the way to be ready for it?
You have to. You just mentioned risk. One thing that was interesting. I think luck and risk go together. In the example of immigrant entrepreneurs, they don't necessarily always have this ability to show, how can you trust me? I don't maybe necessarily have a lot of capital. I haven't been in business for a long time. So in many of the instances, as you mentioned, they are going to take on the risk themselves. They will put, in Turkey, we say they will put their hand under the rock first to give to the other side the faith that I am in this as well. And I'm here with you because I want this business to be successful. Now, when it comes to luck, it was quite interesting for me because every single person I interviewed, without me prompting or asking them about this, they often will talk about, oh, I was lucky I came to New York. I was lucky I met my wife. I was lucky we found this location for our business. So I thought, this is interesting. Why I have to look more into this. And they will talk about it as if it happened because they managed to meet their partner. But when I went back and asked them more questions, what came out is that it wasn't a lucky event that happened to them. They didn't just happen to meet their business partner out of luck, but there was a preparation and steps taken in order to make that happen. And I give again my own company as an example there because, as I mentioned to you, my parents initially started selling these Turkish entrepreneurs' wallets and bags and so on to the Russian and Ukrainian, to the former Soviet market, because that's where the opportunity was right after the fall of the Berlin Wall. Now, how did we meet that person? It was luck, but we were vacationing in Bulgaria in the mid-1980s, and I was singing a Turkish song on the beach. The person approached us and said, "Are you singing Turkish? I'm a Turkish businessman. Here is my business card." And at the time, that's an unthinkable thing to happen. I mean, this is a closed country. Not many people come in, not many people leave. My father kept his business card for all those years. And when we were actually immigrating, becoming refugees, along with those 2 suitcases that were filled with clothes, he also took that business card with him. And he didn't immediately approach him and say, "Oh, I want to work in your factory," for example, or "I want to sell your products." But he only approached him once he understood there is an opportunity to sell his products. So the fact that you keep a business card for many years and then you take an action with it, it can be considered an external luck. And yes, it's a lucky thing that we are on the beach at the same time with this person who happens to be Turkish, living in Turkey, but then it's up to you. What do you do with that business card? So it's just an example.
Yeah, there's something here. A lot of folks, maybe the majority in my experience, are waiting for something to happen. They're waiting for the world to roll out perfectly for them, somebody else to do something and not make something happen. And what I'm getting from what you're saying, and this is sort of how I look at it, is that, being able to see the opportunities as life kind of rolls itself out and then connect dots to leverage those opportunities in a win-win way. It can never be win-lose, in my opinion. If you want to sustain relationships for the long run and keep those doors open, everybody has to win, or the losers won't want to be around very long. But there really is something there in seeing the opportunities, connecting dots, and leverage them to create better results going forward or at any point in your life. And it's not, when I think about luck, it's not, oh my gosh, I met this business partner and this business was really successful. Had I not met them, it wouldn't have happened. I think if we're open to seeing the opportunities and getting better at connecting dots, we can replicate that in bigger and better ways going forward, regardless of what's going on. So this is something I think it's really hard for people to generally understand when, again, I think that so many are waiting for the world to do it, not showing really solid leadership and making things happen in this way. Does that resonate in how you've been thinking about it? It's we're unpacking something here that it's hard for people to get. Yeah.
Absolutely. That's why I titled the chapter, I didn't call it luck, but I titled it Dare to Play Your Hand, because it's up to you. What you do with the opportunity, that first you need to be able to recognize that there's an opportunity, and then you have to dare to play your hand and know that there is no such thing as failure, only information, and you have to keep going. And it's the more action you take, the luckier you get, and the more prepared you are to be able to recognize that luck.
Yeah, that's fantastic. You use your principle number 7, fry in your own oil. I think about businesses that I've started. I always would do virtually every single job in the business, know it inside and out. And even as companies would grow to hundreds of employees, uh, it just made it so much easier to make better decisions and develop people, create more value as a business. But talk about that. What do you mean by frying your own oil?
Yes, it's a Turkish saying, kendi yağında kavrul. It's how you say it in Turkish, and it translates to fry in your own oil. This is something I grew up with. My grandfather will often say it to us. As your listeners can understand, I don't come from a wealthy family. In fact, the opposite. So growing up, we had to be very self-sustaining. And anyone who has grown up in the Balkans will also know you basically grow your own vegetables. You don't really have this luxury to go to a supermarket, especially in communism, and find anything you want. Uh, you realize very early on you have to be self-sustaining. One misunderstanding with that can imply that you have to be this singular person who is frying in his or her own oil. It almost implies that you have to just be by yourself, but it's a paradox, because self-sustaining also means you have to rely on your community in order to be self-sustaining. And that's the most important distinction in this particular principle, because without other people, you cannot achieve anything. You can't even forget business. You can't even cook a meal. You need other people in order to put that food on the table. And you have to rely on a bigger ecosystem. But I apply that for a business in the book because, especially in my research, it came out as a very important and distinctive principle. When businesses start out, I think I advise startups, and I'm an entrepreneurship expert as well. I've worked with many, many startups over the years. One mistake, or I don't want to call it a mistake, but what separates the ones that continue versus the ones that fail is they are self-sustaining from the very beginning. And what does that mean? It's if you are going out there trying to raise money almost from your early years, and you start to rely on outside investment, this tends to have a negative impact on you as a business. You have to initially not go out to raise money and instead fry in your own oil. Understand how can you sustain yourself as a business? If you didn't have any investors, what can you do? So this will allow the company to become a lot more creative, to really understand what is their sustainable competitive advantage. If everything is taken today, let's say, how can you keep sustaining yourself as a business? But if you immediately went out for raising money and you keep injecting money from investors, that's not going to be very beneficial to you. And one thing that I've noticed with immigrant entrepreneurs, especially the ones who have become highly successful, is in the early days, they struggled. Not struggled in the financial sense, but they struggled to understand what makes them self-sustaining. And Hamdi Ulukaya, he initially, started with making feta cheese, but he also faced a lot of struggles with that. And he was able to, again, I talked about failure early on. These are all signals of what is working, what is not working. So he's able to apply them. But if he had gone out to raise money in order to fuel that money into the feta cheese business, today Chobani will not exist.
Yeah, that's incredible. I speak to a lot of high school kids, and I regularly do this in smaller groups of about 20 to 50 at a time. And I've spoken to thousands of them about the virtues of entrepreneurship. And one of the questions I always ask is, would you rather be self-reliant or dependent on family or government or something else to take care of you financially in the future? And I usually can't finish that before all the hands go up saying they want to be self-reliant. And not a lot of folks really lean in to make it happen. They want it, but they don't do the work to make it happen. What do you think is going on there?
I think I don't really, I don't know if I can give the right answer, but I think part of you has to be comfortable with uncertainty. I think a lot of the times we want answers right away, and it's difficult to not know the answers. But that initial phase of trying to figure it out, struggling, and having the uncomfortable period, that's a very important period. And I think instead of rushing out to rely on someone else, and again, relying on someone else, as I said, community, people who support you, frying in your own oil or being self-sustaining doesn't mean you are not going to have people who work with you in order to achieve your goal, who don't support you. I mean, since you mentioned high school students, I was a high school student who just graduated. Someone else helped me in order to apply to the universities. But again, I was thinking, what can I do with my own resources? What is it that they have done that I have done? I have a good TOEFL results. I have good exam results. What can I do now? I have failed in the sense of I haven't gotten into the Turkish university, but what is my next step now? And who can help me get that? I think that's the important distinction here when it comes to frying in your own oil or being self-sustaining. You have to be realistic. You have to be comfortable, as I said, with uncertainty, even with failure, and know that each one of them is a signal for you. And then you can apply it to the next venture, to the next step in your life. That's at least what I have seen.
Yeah. And when it comes to being part of a community, which I encourage, when I talk about self-reliance, it's never you're on an island by yourself, but you can support yourself and you can generate additional resources to lean in and help your community and help others, especially as we start to become more successful going through life. So it's the right balance of really all of that going through. I'm curious. You were talking about raising money and the negative impact that can have on a business, and I 100% agree. And I've never done it. My driving force was just from some of the lessons that I learned. I never wanted outside influences that had conflicts of interest in my business. I wanted to control that, create win-win value for all of the stakeholder communities involved, customers, suppliers, countries, communities we impacted with, our internal team members, all of it. But never wanted that to be an issue. When your students ask about that, how do you get them to think through it? Because a lot of folks starting a business, they believe it's just like step 2 or 3 in the process. Everybody does this. This is how you do it. I think you're so much smarter when you don't have a lot of money. You're forced to make, much, much better decisions. But how do you get your students to think through that so they don't just jump?
I think showing them examples, showing them statistics, showing them research that's done. Mine is I do qualitative research. So my case studies are people who have failed because they've gone out there to just raise money prematurely, keep injecting money from outside investment without asking themselves. And I have a very, worked with a startup company. I was advising them informally. It was a fashion company, great idea. Because it was a great idea, it attracted a lot of investors with some really well-known names in Italy. And unfortunately, their CFO, who is a former student of mine, she said to me, I know, we would discuss it, and she would say, I know what you mean. This is, it's almost like we can't sustain ourselves if we didn't have the outside investment. So the business did fail. So giving students and young entrepreneurs case studies, as well as showing them research of why this is a bad idea. And then it's much easier for them to not go out there and start to raise money. But you are absolutely right. And it's quite interesting to me when you said it's step 2 or 3, because we've never raised the outside investment as a business either. And we are in our 26th year. That has some, advantages and disadvantages. I mean, we don't grow at a very high rate. We grow at a much more sustainable rate as a business. But at the same time, I think I find it quite interesting, almost amusing, that today the immediate thought is the investment we are going to get, and here is our pitch deck, and this is how we go out into investors. But what is your proof of concept? What have you done without relying on any money from the outside? Have you shown that your product is desirable for several years, not just, year one, for several years? Is there a proof of that? So I was speaking recently to a group of investors as well. They asked me, what should we look for in a company if we want to invest in a company? I said that, like, have they proven themselves as a business without any outside investment? So for me, that's number one.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. And yeah, it's really perspective. And I like the way you talk about it in the book. For me, when I look at a business, when it's clear they're here to figure out a way to make as much money as quickly as possible, I want nothing to do with it. If they're looking at really solving a problem, and maybe it's different for you, but when I get in a room of entrepreneurs that are, part of figuring out how to start a company and raise money and do all of that, there could be 30 in the room, but only 1 or 2 I would be interested in investing in because they're so passionate about solving a particular problem. And the way you frame it in the book, the way I wrote it down is, think impact longevity, not business longevity. Like start from that. And you even go so far as to what's important to you, your values, what you really want from your history, what do you really value, and how do you build from that? And I don't totally know where it came from with me, but it's always been about the impact way more than the money, but the money has come. I've had one 9-figure exit and a couple of other exits that were really good. And I'm CEO of 2 companies today. I've got a number of things going that could be quite big financially, but I'm not thinking about that primarily. We need money and resources so we can expand our impact. But it's the impact in really solving a problem. So if you can talk about that for our listeners, where does it kind of come from, and how do you think about impact?
I think you summarized it very well already. In the book, there's a principle. I titled it Profit the Right Way, because one thing I observed, companies that have achieved business longevity didn't focus on making profit for the sake of profit. They didn't aim for growth for the sake of growth. In fact, it was the opposite. What problem am I solving? What is the value that I'm bringing not only to my customers, but to my suppliers, to my employees, everyone I come in contact with, and focusing on that shared value. And it wasn't this idea of, oh, I am in it in order to make money. And when I say that, when I give talks, and when I say that, especially young entrepreneurs who are just starting businesses will come to me and say, I need to make money. And absolutely, without profit, you cannot have a business. But as you mentioned, if you focus on solving a problem, if you are very passionate about, you've identified a problem out there, and it's something especially connected to your values, connected to your past, and you just have to do it. And you say, I know I can bring value to others. It's a shared value. And I know I can make a difference. Then profit comes. It has always come. So that's if you shift your focus. And ironically, I mentioned the founder of Calendly when he really wanted to be an entrepreneur, Tope Aotona. So in the very early days, when he will just very almost like a scientist, he will look at what can make money. Just because he wanted to be an entrepreneur, he got into internet business, websites, and selling some products online, but the businesses failed. Not only until he identified a problem that he was very passionate about solving, it's when Calendly happened. So focusing on that, what impact do you also want to leave for your legacy? What is your legacy going to be? And when you think of this grander, and it's not an unrealistic way of thinking at all, it will lead you to the right place, to the sustainable place. And I think the word sustainable and sustainability got diluted as well, the meaning of that word. But to me, it's just how you do business and being back to basics of doing business.
Yeah, doing business the right way, making profit in the right way. One of the challenges for me, so I think that way and I do this. I fully believe that that's exactly how you think about it. But I've been part of different groups like Conscious Capitalism, attended events and other organizations like that, where it seems like the majority of the room is virtue signaling in a way so they get more business, not really being that way because it's around the money. So it's always a challenge, and I think one of the biggest things for us to solve on the planet is just general pollution. And I've heard you talk about sustainable fashion and how all the waste that's out there. And I'm a fan of organizations like Goodwill, where the reuse retail in some categories is growing 3 times faster than new retail, and I love that. But talk about that a little bit, the challenge with fashion and how it gets people just to keep changing constantly what they're wearing and making that kind of important to how they're seen in the world and how they feel versus what it could be.
Absolutely. I've done a TED Talk on this, 2 different TED Talks at TEDx Boston. And they asked me, can you basically come up with a solution for fashion sustainability problem? It's very difficult because there are so many elements into it. And I think what you just said, paying lip service to sustainability, using it just for marketing because it sounds good. And right after the pandemic, we saw this rise of sustainability. It was almost funny to me because I was like thinking to myself, we have been a sustainable business, but we never really called ourselves that. I mean, to me, as I said, this is just doing business with integrity. Are you putting, when we first started our business, we went out of our way to find glue that is water-based so it won't harm human health. And nobody was doing any kind of, especially in Turkey, especially in the countries where we sell and manufacture our products. You don't, And in those years as well, you don't have the inspectors and inspection. Today it's different. Today there is a lot more regulation. And by the same example, I interviewed the world's largest fair trade tea company. It's Numi Tea. The founders are Iraqi immigrants in US, in California. When they were first starting their tea company, the brother will call the Food and Health Administration in US, and it was just the yellow pages. He will call them and ask about the regulations, and they would say there are none. You can put anything into any kind of bags, tea bags. So going the extra mile, but having the integrity and the sense that you want to do the right thing, eventually it pays off. Maybe people will not do the inspection, they may not notice it, they may not see it, but what you do behind closed doors when nobody is seeing you or when nobody is inspecting you, that to me is real sustainability. In my talk at TEDx, I talk about the problem with overconsumption and overproduction. To me, these are the two biggest issues. And I mean, there is some hope, but I think in recent years, again, we saw sustainability increasing. There were all these consultancy firms who came out and said consumers are willing to pay extra money, especially if you tell them this is a high quality product versus it's a sustainable product. But at the end of the day, high quality product means it's a sustainable product because it will last longer. At the same time, in recent years, there is this almost everyone suspended, yes, DEI, but also sustainability. Nobody really will mention it anymore. Or ESG practices. It's not something that is of importance. And if you stopped any of these practices, to me, it means they were all about marketing. They were not really real. They were not part of your mission and vision in the company to begin with. You did it for marketing.
I view it as how can we virtue signal to get something, not really be that? And I believe what businesses miss, because the number one job of a CEO, the leader of a company, to me, is to continually and responsibly increase the value of the business. And if you're doing it in the right way, where the net impact of your business on the world is positive, you can sustainably sort of grow that and build that over time. And, simple example, a company can make $1 billion in profit, but if they do $1.5 billion in environmental damage because of their products, that's a net negative. They're not creating positive value in the world. And every business can evaluate themselves that way. And if you do it the way you're talking about, the only thing that makes sense to me in terms of how to do business, the opportunities are way more than I can ever take advantage of. This is what happens, and the doors don't shut going forward. So if more business leaders understood that, they would have really amazing long-term growth in cash flow, profitability, creating value in the world runway. Maybe the challenge is too many want to make it now. They don't want to build the foundation to be able to position themselves to do that. So that I think that's a real challenge. I think for a lot of business leaders, putting the time in to build that foundation. So today I'll be 65 this year, so I'm on my 46th year of my overnight success story, and probably the first 23 years was just building a foundation to launch from. A lot of people aren't willing to do that. And how we feel going through life is really everything. Having a bunch of money sitting there isn't going to make you feel any different, at least not long term, in my opinion. Maybe talk about the work to put the foundation in place before we wrap this up.
Yeah, I think you said it very well. It's patience. That's why I talk about business longevity and it's not about the money that you take, but your impact, your legacy. What are you leaving for the next generation? And I think when you change your thinking, to this long-term thinking, and knowing there is no such thing as overnight success. You can make money very quickly, absolutely, but is it going to last long? What is your impact? What is the legacy that you are leaving? I had a student came to me years ago. I'm teaching. I came to France as an associate professor. I'm teaching a course on entrepreneurship, and he approached me and he said, I mean, even at the time, I was very much focusing on these concepts. He said, I ordered these products from AliExpress or Alibaba, and I'm selling them times 10 the profit. And here it's doing quite well. My answer was, for how long? If you want to do this for the next 6 to 1 year or 2 years and make a quick buck, yeah, but it's not going to be long term. So for me, the question has to always be that: what is my legacy? What is my impact? What am I leaving for the next generation?
Yeah. And from my business experience, that piece of my legacy that I'm most excited about are all the leaders that went on to do really cool things and create more value and take these principles you and I are talking about into so many other companies and expose thousands of hundreds of thousands really of additional employees to this way of thinking. So even if my businesses go away someday that I've sold, if that keeps going, that can go generationally. How do you think about your impact when you look back now? I know it's has to have evolved over time, but how do you think about your impact, and what are you most proud of?
Our employees, because I can very proudly say what we have created. For me, that's every single employee who started with us 25, 26 years ago, they still work in our own company. And people who retire, my parents run the factory in Istanbul. When they leave, they cry. And they will come to just have coffee or tea with my parents. They still don't leave. Even, they will just come to say hello. And this family-like environment where what you said, for me, yes, have we made money? Okay. But an employee years later saying a goodwill prayer for you, that to me is wealth. And talking, to their children about our company, that to me is impact.
Yeah, that's incredible. Before we wrap up, do you have any final words of wisdom for our listeners?
I think it's entrepreneurship. We've talked a lot about business. It's not for the faint-hearted. There is a lot of ups and downs. It's, I think, a misconception sometimes that I come across, where you start a business and it will lead you to this wealth. And yes, it's you tend to have a lot more independence, and you get to be very proud of what you have created. But there will be many ups and downs, and that's normal. You just have to keep going. I think, I don't know if it's a word of wisdom, but it's the reality.
I think it is, and it's personal growth. There's so much to learn as long as you're open to it, especially the harder it gets. Neri, for our listeners, they want to learn more about your work. Where can they go and how can they connect with you?
I'm on LinkedIn. They can find me on LinkedIn, Neri Karra Sillaman, just my name. And my website is nerispeaks.com.
Okay, thank you. And I highly recommend that all of the listeners read your book. Just an amazing story, and there's so much in there about helping you be successful if you are running a business or want to start and run a business someday. So thank you, Neri, for being here. This was a fantastic experience for me. It's very inspirational, and I admire you. You're an amazing human.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me as your guest.
All right. And this has been the Show Your Value podcast. If you got some value out of today's episode, please like and subscribe. And until next time, show your value to the world.